Adrian Lorne vanished the same night he uncovered a $2.8 million fraud. Now his body lies beneath the building he tried to expose, in the city of Eldridge, where political promises faded faster than campaign posters. He was the exceptional watchdog with a clean record and sharp instincts. He walked into the records room on the third floor, carrying a flash drive and a file folder. It was as if Adrian had evaporated into thin air. Then, an anonymous email landed in the inbox of the local news station. She had once written community interest stories, school fundraisers, town fairs, but Adrian's story pulled her into deeper waters. Using the spreadsheets as a starting point, she traced one of the dummy companies to a mailbox rental center on the edge of town. The building looked unused. Its doors rusted shut, windows covered with grime. But above the entrance was a new security camera aimed squarely at the road. The caller claimed to be a former construction worker from the library site. His voice was shaky and distorted. Now, the tip raised the terrifying possibility that Adrian's disappearance wasn't just linked to financial fraud, it could involve murder. Public pressure mounted, forcing the city to authorize a limited excavation. A section of the library floor was removed under tight supervision, and forensic teams began working through the hardened layers of concrete and rubble, clearly using some kind of filter. But his message was direct. He said that during the early phases of the library's construction, workers had uncovered what looked like human remains in a disused storm tunnel beneath the foundation. Instead of calling the authorities, they were told by the site manager to seal it off and continue building. The bones were never reported, and no one dared to ask questions. When Lila tried to approach, a black SUV slowed behind her and stopped. She walked away quickly, heart pounding, unsure if it was coincidence or a warning. Another listed a construction supplier as its business type but was registered to a vacant plot of land. They took only her laptop and left everything else untouched. No forced entry, no signs of a robbery. Lila didn't tell anyone. She bought a new laptop and backed up everything in the cloud. For her, the break-in was confirmation someone didn't want this story uncovered. She was now chasing a lead that had already cost someone their life, and the deeper she went, the more dangerous the truth seemed to become. None of the companies seemed real, yet all had been paid with public funds. It contained 3 spreadsheets, each one listing payments made by the city to companies no one had heard of. The sender left no name, no message, just the subject line, "Follow the numbers." The companies listed shared similar traits, generic names, no websites, no contact details, and large deposits made within a 6-month window. In total, the spreadsheets tracked nearly $2.8 million in unexplained payouts. City officials were quick to dismiss foul play. Some hinted at burnout, others suggested a planned disappearance. But to those who knew him, that theory didn't fit. Adrian was obsessed with the truth. He wouldn't have walked away without exposing what he had found. The unanswered questions lingered in Eldridge like a heavy fog, and the silence from City Hall only deepened the suspicion that something far more sinister had taken place. Hours later, his car was found still parked in the lot, keys resting on the driver's seat, untouched. His phone was never recovered. She noticed that most of the fraudulent invoices were signed by the same procurement officer who had recently resigned, citing personal reasons. Digging further, Lila uncovered something even stranger. One of the companies had a mailing address linked to an abandoned warehouse near the riverbank. Most disturbing of all, the building's surveillance system suffered a mysterious outage that began at exactly 11:13 p.m. and ended at 3:02 a.m. No footage captured Adrian leaving the premises. No alarm was triggered. His job as the city's financial auditor gave him access to sensitive files, records that most people never thought to question. Over the years, Adrian had earned a reputation for rooting out shady contracts and catching small-time embezzlers. But in the months leading up to his disappearance, he had been unusually quiet. He stopped attending community forums, declined interviews, and was seen less frequently at council meetings. To those paying attention, it felt like the calm before a storm. And journalist Lila Croft is the only one brave enough to finish what he started. Adrian Lorne had always been the kind of man who followed paper trails instead of people. 2 weeks before he vanished, Adrian submitted a formal request for access to archive city contracts tied to a major construction project, the new municipal library. The budget had exploded from $4 million to nearly $9 million without explanation. Adrian's request was denied on a technicality. Still, he persisted, filing appeals and using workarounds to dig deeper. His closest colleagues recalled how he began working late nights alone at City Hall, sifting through piles of paperwork, logging into old databases, and sending encrypted emails from his personal laptop. Then, on a Tuesday night in October, Adrian clocked into City Hall at 9:47 p.m. Security footage confirmed his entry. When police arrived the next morning, they found no signs of a struggle, no broken locks or scattered papers. Weeks after Adrian Lorne's disappearance, the city of Eldridge returned to a fragile sense of normalcy. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. While authorities gave a standard response about looking into it, Lila Croft, a young freelance journalist, saw a pattern. Lila's research led her to cross-reference the payments with construction contracts from the new library project, the very project Adrian had been investigating. Curious, she visited the site. That night, someone broke into her apartment. A month after the break-in at Lila's apartment, an anonymous call was placed to the local tip line. The library had since been completed and opened with ceremony, praised as a symbol of civic progress. Now, that truth would protect others from ever being buried again. After days of digging, the team found what they hoped they wouldn't: the decomposing remains of a man buried in a shallow cavity just below the western wing. Dental records confirmed it was Adrian Lorne. Adrian had uncovered a sophisticated operation built on bribes, fake contracts, and carefully constructed lies. Someone had gone to great lengths to silence him. Now, with his body uncovered beneath the very building he had investigated, the city of Eldridge could no longer hide from what was buried both in concrete and in truth. The discovery shocked the community, and the pressure forced officials to make a statement. The mayor's office claimed that Adrian had fallen victim to a rogue contractor named Nathan Rudd, someone with a known criminal history, who had briefly worked as a consultant during the early planning of the library project. They framed Rudd as the mastermind behind the financial fraud and implied he may have been responsible for Adrian's death. What had been quietly dismissed as a missing persons case was now an active homicide investigation. Rudd had a record of embezzlement and had disappeared from public view around the time the construction began, but Lila Croft wasn't convinced. The video placed Adrian inside City Hall after hours, in a confrontation that ended before he ever left the building. It contained transaction logs, internal emails, and falsified records tying the officials to at least 6 fraudulent companies. Offshore accounts held the stolen money, some of it already spent, some frozen by federal authorities, mandating digital audits and criminalizing the manipulation of public records. Eldridge, though still haunted, had become the face of reform. It was a vast and deliberate operation, one that had required silence, threats, and ultimately a life to protect. And it clearly implicated the very people who had publicly distanced themselves from the crime. Within 48 hours, arrests were made. The mayor, his chief of staff, and the city's head of infrastructure were all taken into custody. She had researched Rudd before and remembered reading that he had died imprisoned years ago during a violent altercation. She pulled the old prison records to confirm. Her persistence had uncovered lies stacked like bricks, each one part of a wall built to hide corruption. Adrian's death had initially been dismissed as a tragic disappearance, but now it was a symbol, a turning point in a town where accountability had once seemed impossible. There it was in black and white: Nathan Rudd, deceased. Cause of death: internal injuries sustained during an inmate brawl. Now, that truth would protect others from ever being buried again. The condition of Adrian's body suggested he had been restrained before death. He suffered blunt force trauma to the head and had ligature marks around his wrists and ankles. The coroner estimated he died within hours of his disappearance. Even more disturbing was what they found buried with him: a cracked flash drive, melted in parts but partially recoverable. It was sent to a digital forensics lab. Within days, fragments of documents were retrieved. They showed the beginnings of a detailed report Adrian had been compiling, one that highlighted irregularities in project expenses, fraudulent vendor records, and direct links between city officials and offshore accounts. The story was no longer just about missing money. Following the shocking discovery of Adrian Lorne's body beneath the library, Eldridge was thrown into chaos. Citizens demanded answers. Protests erupted outside City Hall. At first glance, the story seemed to tie everything together neatly. So how could a dead man be blamed for a crime that took place after his death? Determined to uncover the truth, Lila turned her attention to the digital evidence recovered from Adrian's damaged flash drive. One of the files contained emails between city officials and someone posing as Nathan Rudd. But when cybersecurity experts traced the metadata, it led to a startling revelation: the emails originated from an internal server inside City Hall, the same secure network used by the mayor's executive staff. It became clear that someone within the government had impersonated Rudd to shift the blame onto a convenient scapegoat, someone who couldn't speak up to deny it. Lila published the findings, and the story caught fire. National media outlets picked it up, and the governor ordered an independent investigation into Eldridge's leadership. Meanwhile, City Hall doubled down, calling the allegations baseless conspiracy theories. They produced more documents pointing to Rudd. But those documents, too, were traced back to the same internal server. The walls were closing in. What began as a financial investigation had become a full-scale political cover-up. Adrian had died for exposing the cracks in a corrupt system. Now, the people behind his murder were scrambling to stay one step ahead of the truth. But their lies were unraveling fast, and Eldridge was no longer a town willing to stay silent. As the independent investigation into Eldridge's government gained momentum, forensic analysts made a breakthrough. The grainy recording showed Adrian in a dimly lit office, standing across from 3 senior city officials, including the mayor. On the table was a manila envelope presumably filled with evidence Adrian had gathered. His body language was tense, his gestures firm, as he pointed at the documents. The officials remained seated, exchanging glances, speaking calmly. But within minutes, things shifted. 2 men entered from off-camera and moved behind Adrian. The footage cut out moments later. That was enough. A hidden hard drive was later recovered from the ceiling panel in the mayor's office. As the trial unfolded, Lila Croft's reporting played a central role in exposing the truth. The state passed new legislation requiring full transparency for all municipal projects. Adrian's name was etched into a memorial outside the library built on top of his grave. He had died uncovering the truth. Now, the tip raised the terrifying possibility that Adrian's disappearance wasn't just linked to financial fraud, it could involve murder. Public pressure mounted, forcing the city to authorize a limited excavation. A section of the library floor was removed under tight supervision, and forensic teams began working through the hardened layers of concrete and rubble.